Well, greetings. StephenGray here, in case you haven't picked that up yet. And you are probably also aware that you're either watching, and you can see it above me here, StephenGray Vision YouTube channel, or you are listening to this on anchor.fm as an audio podcast, also cast about to another half dozen or so sources. So welcome if you've joined me today. So today's a little different. This one's a little different. It's a case of all dressed up and nowhere to go. I was supposed to be interviewing someone today who, out of respect, whose name I will not mention here, but she didn't show up. And so now I'm sitting with, I took 45 minutes or so to get ready, and so I've got lights on, a couple of microphones, one up here and one down here, and my nice Shipibo design ayahuasca patterned vest, excuse me, and my personally made for me Haida Indian carving made by a friend, David Quist. And so I thought I would just share some things anyway. So I'm going to call this one the Great Transition. There are a number of words for this, but basically what it comes down to is it's job one, if you'll excuse the somewhat prosaic metaphor, on this planet now. In fact, it's such a big number one, if you will, that it's far beyond whatever would be in second place. And that is that we are... and I've become increasingly, I've been thinking of this since maybe you who are watching or listening to this are. I've been aware of this for a very long time. In fact, it goes back, I'll confess my generation. I grew up in the late 1960s and early 70s and was exposed to a number of ideas that had to do with transformation. You know, it was the people that were tuned into that aspect of life, what we often call the counterculture, counter to the mainstream culture, now called hippies, but that was a pejorative term at the time, not used by the people who identified with the counterculture. But many of the people in the counterculture envisioned a fairly rapid transformation of the culture. It was a very idealistic time. Of course, it didn't happen that way, and in fact, there was a retrenchment. However, here we are some, 50 years later, and the shit has hit the fan, if you'll pardon my Spanish or French. There's no doubt about it. I've been reading about it a lot. I've been intuiting about it a lot. I've been talking to people about it a lot. And you get these hints when you delve into the medicine spaces as well, that we have now reached a point where we are sliding inexorably, inevitably, into a very difficult period of time. No one knows exactly when it's going to, if you will, hit bottom, but we have to face that fact now. That's why I say it's job number one, excuse me, that we cannot go blithely about our business pretending that this current, what would you say, infrastructure or trajectory of human activity has much consistent life left in it at this point. The status quo is crumbling before our very eyes. What it really comes down to, from many of the experts, and I'm going to mention two of them. This is the alternative, excuse me, interviewing myself, so to speak, today, as opposed to the guest that I was supposed to have. I'm going to feature two in particular, one of whom I've already interviewed, and the other one I've actually had a couple of conversations with recently, and may interview in the future. Both remarkable visionaries. And people like this, I'll tell you who they are. It's Chris Beisch, who has spoken at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference twice, and who I've had a number of dealings with. whom, if you prefer perfect English. And he has several books, but his most recent is this very powerful treatise book called LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Christopher M. Bache, PhD. I'm going to talk a little bit about what he's done there. Not too much, because I have an interview with him on the site and he goes into that. I'm just going to mention it briefly. And this one you may not be aware of, although maybe you're aware of Dwayne I thought I heard us say on his answering machine that it's pronounced Elgin. I've always pronounced that name Elgin. In fact, my cousin grew up on Elgin Avenue in Simcoe, Ontario. Excuse me. Both amazing books, super powerful books, and Dwayne's book in particular is very stark, but also very visionary about what could unfold. So, coming back to this notion of job number one, the sense that I'm getting from these kinds of visionaries, not to mention the many, many, many thousands of scientists who are tuned into this issue, is that it's going to be climate change that creates the greatest amount of havoc. Now that, of course, could spin off into economic collapse. In fact, there's extremely good chance that indeed will happen. And so we need to pay attention. We need to be aware of this. And my particular mission, my prayer, if you will, is that the word be passed around, as it were, that there be an educational zeitgeist meme going around that lets people know what's going on. And you know, there's lots of people that already know what's going on in that regard, and there's a lot of concern, of course, a lot of compassion, a lot of everything, a lot of depression, a lot of despair, etc., etc. I'm pretty sure the so-called negative components of that, the despair, is only going to get worse, and it may get worse fairly quickly, like at a fairly rapid pace within the next 5 to 10 years. The climate feedback loops, you know, people have been using this term feedback loops, have been coming in at us for quite a while. And again, a lot of people just do not want to hear this, and I don't blame people for not wanting to hear this. It can be really upsetting. It can be depressing to think that we're going into a really difficult time on this planet. However, the only decent, sane, caring reason for addressing this stuff at all is that on the great likelihood that we are indeed heading into some sort of a vortex where we're going to be sucked into a series of escalating problems and breakdowns associated with climate change in particular, but Lord knows what else will come into play, you know, pandemics, anyone. What needs to be shared is that this had to happen. You know, you could say that from a number of points of view. Some of it might seem a little bit in the woo-woo category, you know, that it's been predicted, prophesied, etc. However, or it's just we've reached an inevitable karmic break point or end point or, you know, transformation point. Regardless of, you know, how you think we have come to this point, we have overrun the planet. Our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, has overrun the planet, and it's not looking good for the future. You know, whether that unfolds in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. In fact, Dwayne lays out a 50-year scenario that when you read the first part, I've read, what have I read up to page 118 out of about 160 pages in this book. The first half of the book or so is pretty distressing because he, you know, makes reference to a lot of very difficult to argue with science about where, you know, what factors are in play right now. However, as I said, the only reason for talking about this stuff at all, in my opinion, is not to scare people, not to present some sort of doomsday scenario, but to point out that if you see things becoming more difficult on this planet, there may be a reason for that, and that's the one view or understanding that is going to save our butts, you know, that if people can see, if people can even have a very tentative faith that this had to happen, it's part of a death and rebirth scenario, that we are potentially able to create a mature, and this is again, Dwayne puts it like this, humanity's great transition to a mature planetary civilization. So even if you don't think that's likely, even if you barely think it's possible at all, I'm absolutely convinced that it's the only sane attitude to take. You know, if you take any other attitude, for those of you that have studied energy medicine and the way that thoughts generate physical ramifications throughout the body, that if you know, of course, everyone's going to get despairing occasionally, I'm sure, you know, and especially if things get a lot worse over these next, decade or two. But we somehow need to find our solid seat within that, as much as we can. And by no means is it just for oneself, it's for everybody. You could use metaphor of points of light, or I've always liked the metaphor of being a rock. In fact, I was told that one time during a psilocybin journey. I just heard this message come in: be a rock for people. The more we can not get caught up, at least for long, sure, you fall, I'll use a metaphor from my old Buddhist teacher, who loved riding horses, and he used horse riding as a metaphor for riding one's own mind, that when you're in sync with the horse, it's all good, but then, you get out of sync because you get into your head, you get worried, fearful, second guessing yourself, whatever. You're no longer fully there, and then you start to fall, or something goes wrong with your, you're not riding the horse properly anymore. Maybe you're starting to fall to the side, and it's the falling that wakes you up. So as you lose it, hopefully, if you have enough awareness, if you've trained your mind enough, if you've done enough sort of simple sit down, shut up, and pay attention, thank you, Terence McKenna, meditation, you catch yourself before you completely crash, and wound yourself permanently or whatever. So you're riding your horse, you're riding your mind, and this is what we need to do. This is what anyone who might possibly think of themselves as what you might call a spiritual warrior, as a guiding light for other people, as an anchor, as a rock for other people. Okay? So again, what I want to do here, I don't want this to be a super long one. I'm going to try to keep it down to about a half an hour for this one. And I'm speaking casually. I'm trying not to be too formal about all this today, because it's ad hoc, spontaneous sort of scenario anyway. I'm going to read you a couple of the quotes from Dwayne's book, Choosing Earth. He has several other books, by the way. He's got one I'm actually starting to read in a PDF form. It's free. It's from way back in the 70s, maybe 78 or 73, called Awakening Earth, and it's quite brilliant as well. And very, is the word prescient, like the things that he was saying then are 100% applicable at this time. It's quite visionary that way, foreseeing. So I'm going to read you a couple of the quotes. This one, I wrote in my note, it says, on why we must face the dark possibilities. Quote, if we can visualize in our social imagination how a ruinous or oppressive future lies ahead, then we don't have to enact that future in physical reality. All right? So I'm going to jump tracks a little bit at this point because I want to bring in Bruce Damer. Bruce is another person I've interviewed on StephenGray Vision, and he's similar, he's a visionary as well, and you can check that interview out and find out for yourself. But what Bruce is seeing these days is the development of what he's been calling, among other names, a meta-organism. And so what he's referring to is that he's picking up the fact that, okay, see, how to explain this properly in a way that you'll understand. You may have heard of this notion, not 100% proved over and over again, that when a group of people this one experiment was they were praying over a body of water, and apparently were able to help purify that particular body of water, a pond or a lake or something. And there was another one where they put words like love or something on glasses of water and changed some of the patterns in the water. So it's that basic principle. What Bruce Damer is seeing is that more and more people are beginning to recognize that not just one person's intention, but many people's intention, if it's a shared intention and it comes from the heart and it has some real power, it's aligned with reality, you might say, then it can impact the material world. Again, some people might, some of you who are watching or listening to this might consider that, might disdain that a little bit somewhat, roll your eyes, chuck it off into the woo-woo category. However, I think we need to entertain these possibilities now because, the alternatives are not particularly pretty. And I'll say, by the way, that I spent about a dozen years participating probably about 35 or 40 times in Native American church peyote prayer ceremonies down in Washington State. I say down in because I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And I saw a few things personally myself that were pretty impressive, but I heard stories from some of the elders down there that completely defy what us reductionist, rationalist, so-called Westerners would consider possible. For example, the roadman, the man who runs the meetings oftentimes, this particular roadman often ran the meetings that I went to, once said that he said, it's not easy these days. It's gotten watered down with all the different kinds of people that come into this teepee. But back in the old days, when it was being oppressed much more directly by the white man's authorities, and they had to do it in secret back in the 1960s and 70s, it was all Native people. It was all elders mostly, pretty much all elders. And they were able to get out of their heads and keep their mind on the prayer for the whole night. So not to go into a big thing about this, but basically each meeting generally has somebody who's called the sponsor, who is the person who has asked for the purpose of the meeting, what they want people to pray for. And so this one particular meeting, and he said this, we saw this a number of times, things like this. He said, I've seen somebody come into this teepee with a broken leg, and we prayed for that person all night, and in the morning he walked out on 2 legs. So there is this possibility of what Bruce Damer calls affecting the probability of the field when we can join our intention together. So this is key, right? This is what Dwayne Elgin is talking about when he says that if we can visualize in our social imagination how ruinous or oppressive a future lies ahead, then we don't have to enact that future in physical reality. And again, this is as I said at the beginning, at the outset, this is the only reason for talking about this kind of material. Here's another one. Finally, we know we have a choice between extinction and transformation. Same idea, right? It's not out of our control. Most people, both from the visionary side like Dwayne or Chris Beisch, would say that we've probably passed a tipping point. If there had been a sharp turn in the trajectory of human activity in terms of environmental responsibility and wealth equity and all that kind of thing 50 years ago, then we might be looking at a much different scenario now with much greater openness or possibilities. However, at this point, after 50 years, well, much longer actually, but since then, 50 years of very small incremental changes in favor of looking after our environment, it looks like it's too late to stop major calamity at this point. But again, the understanding is, and okay, cut there for a second, now it's time to talk about Chris Beisch, because the view that Chris got came from And again, I won't go into it at much detail because you'll see or hear if you watch or listen to the interview that I did with Chris a couple of months ago on this channel, on the StephenGray Vision YouTube or Anchor, etc. Blah, blah, blah. Okay? Anyway, what Chris did, this is the shortest version I can make of it. What Chris did was, in his early in his career as a professor of religion and religious studies and philosophy in Youngstown, Ohio, he undertook what I don't think he planned at the time turned out to be a 20-year journey, you might say, or even course of studies, first-hand studies, doing what amounted to 73 high-dose LSD sessions. He did these in the following the Stan Grof or Stanislav Grof protocol, which essentially is very carefully protected environment or setting with a sitter who knows what they're doing or has had experience with this kind of thing, and then a playlist of very carefully curated music and eye shades. And then the following day, so Chris would do this on a Saturday, and then he would take all day Sunday to recapitulate with the headphones on again so that it would trigger the memories of what was going on when that music played, and so write extensive notes the following day. So that was that's kind of the basis of what he did 73 times over a 20-year period. And Chris is very remarkable that way. This is something like, don't try this at home. And in fact, even Chris has said to me and in other situations more than once that he, in retrospect, if he could do it again, he would have gone slower. Nonetheless, we can't regret what he did, and I don't think he should either, because what he brought back, the subtitle of the book is Diamonds from Heaven. He truly brought back diamonds from heaven. What happened was I believe every single time he did this, large doses, 500 to 600 micrograms of LSD, he described the first there were two parts to each journey. The first part was about 2 hours long, and in his words was often, quote, exquisitely painful, as he experienced the throes of ego death, but not just his ego, his identification with the species, the death of the species ego as well, and was thrust into all kinds of challenging moments in terms of just letting go of everything, and fighting with that occasionally, but then just keep going and going. And so what happened after 2 hours in these sessions, and again, this is all in the book and a bunch of it in the interview, is that he broke out into what I'm calling for the moment the vast intelligence of the universe, and over the period of 20 years, increasingly deeper into that universe of intelligence and communication, and brought back these diamonds from heaven, as I mentioned. So the point of this, though, is that I'm not sure when it started, but somewhere in the later half, the second half, the later portion of this 20-year journey, he began to get a message that we are heading into. I think he implied that it's not the end of the story, so to speak, isn't written completely. It's not carved in stone yet. But as he went through the later years, he said it became increasingly clear, or that the information coming in was increasingly optimistic, I guess you could say, that we are indeed likely to make it eventually. No timeline, none of this 2012 stuff. As a species to break out into or evolve. Breakout sounds like it's something sudden. I think it would be a very slow unfolding that takes place over decades and perhaps longer, but eventually arriving at what Chris has called the Great Awakening, or a Great Awakening. Dwayne again calls it a mature planetary civilization. And so, however, Chris also, the other aspect of the download was that there has to be inevitably preceding the Great Awakening, or a Great Awakening, is a great death. In other words, you can't pour, what is it, new wine into old skin or something like that. There has to be an emptying. There has to be a change of consciousness. It's not just a given, Dwayne Elgin points out some rather dark possibilities if we don't start to make those changes, not just making life increasingly less habitable, but possibilities of mass panic and fear. Sorry to have to say this stuff, but again, the whole purpose of doing this today and all this other kind of work that people are doing is that we need to face that possibility and take it seriously and recognize that we have to undergo a change of heart, a change of consciousness. We have to start connecting at a much deeper level with who we are as human beings, with nature, with each other, with the cosmos all together. That's our task. That's our job. And as I said earlier, if you cannot find that attitude, any other attitude is dysfunctional. It's actually working against that, both for yourself and for those around you. So, again, the great death is the idea that we have to let go of the illusion that we can continue on in this materialistic way as if we are disconnected from the planet, as if our behavior as a species does not affect like the ongoing kind of consistency or continuity of life. So that's Chris Beisch and his remarkable book, extremely important book. I want to go back for a minute. I'm not going to go on too much longer about all this, but I do want to go back a little more to some of the quotes I've been writing down from Dwayne Elgin. Excuse me. Oh, I really like this one. This is both a personal or about individuals and about the collective. And it says, acknowledging our brokenness is the beginning of the path toward wholeness. And again, that's what I meant by recognizing that what's going on now is not sustainable, and it will be breaking down. It is breaking down now. And then back onto this notion of the collective intention. Quote, by mobilizing our capacity for collective imagination, we can consciously envision where we are headed and then choose a more promising path forward. Again, that's the point of saying anything like this, is to begin to tune in, to begin to recognize that we are connected to each other, we are connected to the possibility of impacting the probability of the field, as Bruce Damer might put it, and that we need more than ever to make that recognition and to continue in that general direction. Okay, I think I'm starting to get a bit repetitive on this, so I'm going to end it here and encourage you to check out the interview with Chris Beisch on this channel, and also the one with Bruce Damer. They're both remarkable visionaries, and you're going to be hearing a lot more from them. In fact, Chris and I are talking about a bit of a shared project where I might function in the way that I have with my book Cannabis and Spirituality, where I functioned as editor in the sense of collecting all these stray cats together. Not stray cats, anyway, herding cats, but no, it wasn't difficult. I got 17 contributors together for that book and then wrote a few chapters myself. So in a similar way, I'm now looking at, because I consider this to be the number one thing by so far, that nothing else even comes close, that we need to pay attention to on this planet now, that the days of entertaining ourselves to death, wasn't there a book called that, entertaining ourselves to death, of just la 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 la, entertaining ourselves, trying to and again, this only applies to, I don't know, what, a fifth at the most of the planet that are even able to do this, that have the resources, have the support systems in the culture, enough money to entertain ourselves that way. But it can't go on much longer. I hope you understand that. And so that's what we're doing. We're trying to encourage people to pay attention, to see this as a far from equilibrium moment, that is really, it's actually not about us anymore. It is in a sense, but depending on your age, this is going to play out over a longer time span. So it's really about what you might call bodhisattva activity. Okay, it's about having a vision for where this planet can go, could go, should go, must go eventually. It's that, and that's the connection. That is the consciousness transformation we're talking about. We're talking about realizing that it's not a dogma, it's not an idea, it's a potential reality for us human beings to recognize that we are indeed connected. We are part of the web. We are part of the net of Indra. Do you know that one? It's a beautiful metaphor that everyone is a diamond, a jewel, and that there's an infinite number of these jewels, these diamonds, and that the light from every one reflects off every other one. So we have an individual sense of ourselves, and we can act as individuals. We can bring our compassion and our vision, but we are ultimately and always connected to everything else. So on that cheery note, with a prayer for the healing and awakening of a planet in trouble, I leave you.